Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so today is Labor Day, September 2nd, and this is the morning session. Okay, so we have been working our way through the mental factors, the cetasikas, and yesterday afternoon we covered the what are called the ethically variable mental factors. Those are mental factors which don't have a fixed moral quality, whether unwholesome, wholesome, resultant, and so on, but can be present in a variety of states of consciousness and take on the moral quality of the state of consciousness with which they are associated. So there were 7 that are called the universals because they're present in every Cheetah, in every state of consciousness, and then 6 which are called occasionals because they're present in some or even most Cheetahs, but not in all of them. Okay, so now we continue with the next group, which are the unwholesome cetasikas, or the unwholesome factors. So these are factors that are present only in unwholesome Cheetahs. So of these unwholesome Cheetahs, 4 of them are called, well first let's just go through the list. There's delusion, shamelessness, fearlessness of wrongdoing, restlessness, greed, wrong view, conceit, hatred, envy, avarice, worry, sloth, torpor, and doubt. So these 14 mental factors are termed the unwholesome. And of these 14 unwholesome mental factors, 4 of them are called universal unwholesomes because these 4 are considered to be present in every unwholesome Cheetah. And these are the first 4: delusion, shamelessness, fearlessness of wrongdoing, and restlessness. Okay, we could look at the text, which gives some explanation. So, the first one, delusion, this is moha, which is the 3rd unwholesome root. And this is synonymous with another word that's used in the text, avidya, which means ignorance. And then delusion is explained as mental blindness or unknowing, absence of correct knowledge, and its function is, it seems that there's 2 functions here. One is that it doesn't penetrate the real nature of phenomena, and then the second function is that it conceals the real nature of phenomena. So it has both a aspect of lack, or simply a negative aspect of non-penetration, but it also has a more active function of concealing, covering up the true nature of things. And then at the end it says that it should be seen as the root of all that is unwholesome. Okay, the next 2 qualities, shamelessness and fearlessness of wrongdoing, are actually most easily understood as the negations or opposites of two wholesome qualities, hiri and otapa, which might be translated shame and fear of wrongdoing, except that I think shame is not such an accurate rendering for hiri, because shame usually suggests a feeling of embarrassment or discomfort after one has committed something wrong. Or at least that's one aspect of shame. Whereas hiri, I would now prefer to translate it as conscientiousness. So this is the quality which makes one reflect that there are unwholesome actions, and one doesn't want to enter upon these unwholesome actions because one recognizes that they are that they are unwholesome, and out of a sense for one's own moral integrity, out of a concern for one's own inner moral dignity, one doesn't want to engage in these actions because it would be a kind of staining or defiling one's own innate potential nobility of character. And so some people abstain from wrongdoing out of the sense of conscientiousness. They're not concerned what others think, but just the inner monitor, the inner voice tells them that's wrong, you should not do it, and so they avoid doing anything unwholesome. So that quality is the sense of shame, or now what's translated here, shame, but I would now translate conscientiousness. And the other quality is here translated fear of wrongdoing, or we might, maybe now I translate it moral dread. And this is the factor that persuades, by reason of which one abstains from wrongdoing from fear of the consequences, because one is afraid of being found out, caught by others, seen by others, and getting a bad reputation. Is my voice... Did somebody turn the lights out? Oh. So they knocked the lights out, but... Okay, the darkness of delusion. Yeah. Okay, so I was saying that moral dread is the quality by which one abstains from wrongdoing, from dread of the consequences, because either one is afraid that others will know and blame one, criticize one, ostracize one, or else from fear that maybe the police will find out, one will be arrested and imprisoned, and also based on the understanding of karma, the law of cause and effect, from fear of the undesirable consequences, that if one engages in wrongdoing, one is going to create unwholesome karma, which will bring misery and suffering in the future. So that is conscientiousness and fear of wrongdoing, or moral dread. And so the absence of those, like somebody who we say is without any sense of conscience, shameless, reckless, morally reckless, that is the person who has shamelessness and lack of moral dread. Or we can say lack of moral conscience and somebody who's morally reckless. So in all unwholesome cheetahs, it's that even just fleeting unwholesome thoughts, there's some degree of lack of conscience and moral recklessness present. Then the fourth unwholesome cetasika, that's universal, the fourth universal unwholesome mental factor is restlessness. So in every unwholesome mental state, according to the Abhidhamma, there's some degree of underlying degree of restlessness, some even a very slight degree of agitation. So this makes a very convincing reason for, abstaining from wrongdoing. Like we might think of the thief who pulls off a successful bank robbery. They think that's speaking to their fellow thieves. Come on, guys, we robbed this bank. We're going to get away with millions. It's a slam dunk. We can do it easily. And we just leave the States. We go off to some Caribbean island, and we could just, live there like kings. And so suppose they pull off the bank robbery successful. They get off. They're on their so-called desert paradise. But always there'll be some degree of restlessness or agitation in the mind. So they're never really content or satisfied. So, they divide up the loot evenly. They rob 1 million. There are 4 guys involved. They divide it 250,000 apiece. And what's going to happen before long? What? They might squeal, yeah, maybe that, or that's a possibility. Exactly, that's what I was thinking of. They won't be satisfied with, well, nowadays, 250,000 maybe. Let's suppose they do $4 million and they divide it up 1 million apiece. They still won't be satisfied with that, and then they have to start, 3 will gang up against 1, or 2 against 2, until there's only 1 left with the 4 million plus interest. And then he'll be having a guilty conscience, and he'll be taking sleeping pills to sleep. Actually, that's an interesting point. No, I think guilt will actually come closer to kukuchang, which we'll come to later. I'm just saying that there'll always be restlessness in an unwholesome mind. Okay, now we come to a group of 3 which often go together. We might call this the the greed trio. And here's greed on piano, view on the bass, and conceit playing the drums. Okay. Okay, now some people asked during the earlier discussion, how do we explain ego according to Buddhism? And the concept of ego is closely related to the greed trio, coupled with ignorance. Ignorance is also sort of in there participating, maybe playing the trumpet, or, well, it's actually the background. Ignorance is in the background, so ignorance will be the bass player. And maybe greed is the piano, wrong view, we could say, is a saxophone or trumpet player. So we could say that ego is based upon greed, wrong view, and conceit. And they work together in this way that, okay, delusion, we could say, is the failure to understand. This is at a very fundamental level. Delusion, at least one aspect, is the failure to understand selflessness, the idea that there is no truly existing self or ego entity. And so because of this fundamental delusion, this non-penetration of the selfless nature of Dhammas, there arises a kind of craving for, which is another term for greed, a craving for a sense of personal identity. And so out of that craving, for a personal identity, some solid standpoint that one could stand on and say, this is me, this is what I am, there arises a very fundamental conceit, which is called asmimana, which is the conceit, I am. And then once this conceit of an I arises, we start comparing this I with others. How am I ranking in relation to others? You know, reinforced now by the computer programs. You could like somebody on Facebook, dislike them, rate them from their postings from 1 to 5, whatever. Okay, so with conceit, one starts comparing oneself with others and then thinking, we get the three aspects of conceit, the three modes of conceit. I am better. I am equal or just as good as them. And then there's another kind of conceit, which seems to us the opposite of conceit in ordinary English. And this is the feeling, the sense that I'm a failure. Everybody is just so much better than poor old me. This is called the inferiority conceit. The conceit, I am worse. So then we get the three types of conceit. And then going back to the conceit, I am, whether we consider ourselves better, just as good as, or worse, one tends then to solidify the sense of I am by forming a view about this I. And so this leads to the view of a self. And so this is giving a kind of philosophical covering or coating to the original idea, the more fundamental idea of I am. And so one gets first type of wrong view, the most basic type, is what the Buddhist texts call Sakkaya Ditthi. Okay, Sakkaya Ditthi is the view of personal identity. The view that there is some substantial self existing in relation to the five aggregates, either identical with the five aggregates or separate from them, possessing them or related to the five aggregates in some way. And then from Sakkaya Ditthi, there develops what are called the two extreme views. One is Eternalism, the view that holds that there is a permanent, eternal, unchanging self, which remains ever the same, existing for eternity. And the other is the view of annihilationism, which says that personal identity is just the physical body, and when the body perishes at death, everything is finished, and there's no continuation of consciousness beyond death. And then especially from annihilationism, there can emerge what is called fixed wrong view, and this is the wrong view, or a variety of wrong views, that denies the meaningfulness of moral distinctions, which denies the validity of moral distinctions between good and bad, right and wrong, and which holds that one can behave in any way that one wants, that there's no need to restrain oneself from what foolish people consider wrongdoing, and no need to engage in what foolish people consider good deeds, like giving, observing precepts, and so on. And what's significant from the Buddhist analysis of mind, which we've covered already, is that wrong view and conceit are always occurring in the Cheetahs rooted in greed. So there's attachment to views, so that's how greed relates to views, and the conceit arises from some kind of grasping or craving for a sense of substantial identity. But what the Abhidhamma says is that views and conceit do not occur in the same Cheetahs, that when there's a wrong view, there's no conceit, and when there's conceit, there isn't the wrong view present in the same Cheetahs. Though conceit can become a condition for a wrong view, and wrong view can become a condition for conceit. And one interesting question that takes us a little bit outside the sphere of Buddhist, so-called Buddhist orthodoxy, and that is, if view is an unwholesome mental factor related to greed, occurring in the greed Cheetahs, how about attachment to Buddhist views? Excuse me? Yeah, this is the question sort of that the Abhidhammikas don't really address. In fact, if they take any position, it's that you can't become attached to a Buddhist view because the Buddhist is advocating non-attachment. But my own experience teaches me quite otherwise. That people can become attached to Buddhist views as well when they identify with them and think, I'm a Buddhist, so therefore my view is correct. Or else I'm a Theravadan, therefore the Sarvastivadins and the Mahayana view is wrong. Or I'm a Madhyamakan, therefore I disprove every Buddhist view. Excuse me? Oh, okay. Wait, let me just finish. Yeah, but actually in the suttas, the Buddha himself says to the monks, he says, after he explains the view of dependent origination, he says, even this view, which is so fine, so noble, so pure and clean, even this view you should not cling to, you should not fondle, you should not become attached to, but you use this like the raft for crossing the stream. But a lot of Buddhists also take the raft and, put it in a museum or, shellac it and put some ornamentation on it and invite their friends to a party to look at their raft. Okay, I don't want to take questions, but if just Neil seems to have a quick question. Better take the microphone.
Wouldn't the Wouldn't it depend whether the attachment was based on tanha, craving, versus chanda, desire, in a way?
Well, chanda would be present also in the states. Let's say chanda will be present in the cheetahs associated with greed. So it's a different quality than greed. And chanda will also be present in the wholesome cheetahs associated with right view. So when one is using right view, the views of the Dhamma properly as a means for cultivation and for striving, for development, then there's chanda as the desire for the good. But since it's a wholesome citta, then there's no greed. So if one is doing something good with the idea that, okay, by doing these merits, by doing this good deed, I'll get a lot of merit so I can be reborn in a wealthy family or in a heavenly world, then there's a greed which is maybe associated with a right view of karma and its fruit. Very quickly.
Just a quick question. Can we say that wrong view is judgment? This is good or bad, instead of me being a mere observant and wait for the big picture?
I wouldn't say that judgment is intrinsically wrong view, because there can be right judgments and wrong judgments. I'd say wrong judgments would at least be connected with wrong view. Though I'd say that a wrong judgment is a rather complex phenomena involving a multiplicity of mental factors. But I'd say in a wrong judgment, wrong view is a component of that complex. In a right judgment, right view would be a component. Okay, we want to continue now, so we've taken the greed trio, which actually becomes a quartet when we bring delusion into the picture. Then there is the I think what's translated worry, actually worry is a bad translation. Okay, a wrong translation. The greed trio is greed, wrong view, and conceit. And then it becomes the quartet when we take delusion, which is present in the background. So I say delusion is like the bass player. The thumping of the bass is always boom, 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 boom. It's there in the background. Okay, now we come to the hatred or the aversion quartet, which becomes a quintet if we take delusion. And this is hatred, which, again, hatred is maybe too strong a rendering of dosa. Hatred is the strong manifestation, but if we understand it as aversion, then we can bring in all gradations, many gradations, from strong hatred to a little irritation, dislike, of resistance. Okay, and then going along with aversion, there is envy. Bum. Okay. Envy. Then avarice, I think not such a good translation here. But it's better to translate as miserliness or stinginess. And then the number 11, which is translated as worry, I think it's better to translate this as remorse, regret, and maybe a strong form of this would be guilt, the sense of guilt. Okay, so I've explained that aversion that covers this whole range of negative responses from outright hatred to subtle dislike, irritation, annoyance, repugnance. Okay, then envy is associated with aversion because envy means resenting the good qualities, the virtues, the success, the achievements of others. And so you could see that when others are successful or have good qualities or worthy achievements, and one feels envy towards them, then there's an aversion, a dislike for their success, for their good qualities, for their achievements. And then miserliness means that one doesn't want to share one's own wealth, one's own possessions, one's own types of success with others. So if we look at the description on page 84 of Macharya, which I would translate miserliness, its characteristic is concealing one's own success when it has been obtained. So one conceals one's own good fortune. So the very rich person, he doesn't want others to be coming and saying, please give, please help. So he might, present a facade of being just a poor, ordinary person so he can keep his wealth to himself. And its function is not to bear sharing these with others, and it's manifest as shrinking away from sharing and as meanness or a sour feeling. So it's like maybe the paradigm of Macharya, of miserliness, is Scrooge from the Christmas Carol. Okay, then the next quality is, in Pali, it's kukucha, which I would now translate or revise to translate as remorse. And so it's explained as remorse after having done wrong, and its characteristic is subsequent regret. And its function is to sorrow over some wrong that has been done or some good deed that one hasn't done. One missed the opportunity to do good. Now what's interesting is that in the Theravada Abhidhamma, remorse is always considered an unwholesome quality. But I believe in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, there are two kinds of remorse, wholesome and unwholesome. Is that correct? Well, I looked it up yesterday in the Abhidharma Kosha. So they distinguish, in fact, I would seem to agree with this, that there should be a good kind of remorse when one has done something wrong and one recognizes it as wrong, and then one feels regret over that and resolves to change one's ways in the future. But this kind of the unwholesome remorse, I would say, would be an overbearing obsession with having done something wrong, so that one is constantly blaming oneself, criticizing oneself, flagellating oneself for having done wrong. Whereas with the wholesome one's remorse, one recognizes I've done something wrong, I should try to make reparations for it, either by apologizing to the person that I hurt or by making good the situation that I mismanaged so that it led to undesirable consequences. Okay, now in the aversion quartet, envy, miserliness, and remorse will occur along with aversion, but not necessarily. Sometimes there'll be simple aversion without them, but whenever envy, miserliness, or remorse occur, underlying them, there is always some degree of aversion, disliking the success of others, disliking to share one's achievements with others, and condemning oneself for having done wrong. Okay, the next two factors, sloth and torpor, are factors that lead to, actually I now translate them, I think it's more meaningful, dullness and drowsiness. And the drowsiness spoken here is not the ordinary sleepiness that comes, at night when it's bedtime is coming, then you start to get drowsy. Or if you've had an especially busy day and suddenly you have some free time, you just start to get drowsy and want to take a nap. In fact, I think in the Savastivada Abhidhamma they recognize drowsiness as being a variable quality depending upon the Cheetah. If it's an unwholesome Cheetah, it's unwholesome. If it's a wholesome Cheetah, or it can be a neutral quality. But what's being, I think what the Theravada and Abhidhammikas have in mind when they put drowsiness as an unwholesome quality is the experience that comes up. I think they're basing this on the experiences of meditation. When you've had a good night's sleep, so you wake up, happy and refreshed, vigorous, ready to go for the day, then maybe you come to the meditation hall and you sit down to meditate, and at the beginning you're all, cheered up, like, okay, I'm going to master the 4 jhanas. I feel so vigorous, I can just go right through and Arhat Pala Cheetah or bust this morning. And then mindfully breathing in, out. Wow, I'm quickly on the way to first jhana. 10 minutes go by. This is a little bit harder than I thought. In, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. Bhante, wake up, wake up! Or if you were meditating in the Zen tradition, the monitor would be coming around with the wake-up stick, and you get a whack, whack. So it's that kind of mental state is drowsiness. Okay, and then we have doubt. Doubt we've already covered when we discussed the doubting consciousness. And just to repeat, that this is not the kind of what I would call the intelligent or inquiring doubt, where you have questions, uncertainties about the Dhamma, about what's right, what's wrong, and you want to get them cleared up by investigating and making inquiries. But this is the skeptical doubt, which functions somewhat like a straitjacket on the mind, which doesn't allow you to launch out in a wholesome direction. Okay, these are the 14 unwholesome mental factors, and I want to add a little footnote to this. And the footnote also will apply to the wholesome or beautiful mental qualities. It seems to me that the formulators of the different Abhidhamma systems had to make choices in order to have a somewhat compact system. Because I've looked in the suttas with this in mind, and I find that numbers of other unwholesome mental states are mentioned in the suttas which don't have corresponding unwholesome cetasikas in the Abhidhamma system. For example, if you want to get a source for this, you can look in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 7, the simile of the cloth, which mentions 16 upakilesas, minor defilements. And then if you look at the repetition suttas at the end of each section of the Anguttara Nikaya, there's a kind of repetition section which comes, which always mentions, I think it's 17 defilements which have to be fully understood, eliminated, eradicated, abandoned, removed, and so on. So, for example, amongst these, we find the quality called one is palasa, which I've translated insolence. Another is maya, which is translated deceitfulness. Sateya, craftiness or scheming. Tamba, obstinacy. Saramba, competitiveness. Atimana, arrogance. Mada, vanity. And we don't find counterparts for these, or cetasikas for these, in the Abhidhamma system. And the Sarvastivada system includes some of these, but doesn't include some that the Theravada includes. And so, as I said, my assumption is that each system had to make its own selection of factors in order to have a manageable scheme of mental factors. And when we come to the beautiful factors, I'll mention some beautiful factors which I would include if I were making up a new Abhidhamma. And the other day, Susie here mentioned fear. Though I would say that there are two kinds of fears. There's unwholesome fear, where it's a fear which is rooted in the ego. And there's the wholesome fear, would be fear of wrongdoing or moral dread, fear of doing wrong because of the undesirable consequences. We could take a few minutes of questions. I don't want to get into a full question section, but anything that's unclear here. Okay, again, your name?
Gabe. G-A-B-E, Gabe.
G-A-B-E, Gabe, okay.
I was thinking fear, which you just mentioned, and also pride.
Yeah, well, pride, one could say, could be another word for conceit. You know, they're very closely connected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just take Mahendra and Ajit and Neil. Then I'm sorry, that will be it, because I want to go on.
The factors mentioned in 5 hindrances, how can they ever be good? Otherwise, they would not be called hindrances. So, how can remorse be good? I can understand repentance might be good, but remorse, how can it ever be good?
The way I explained, that if one has done something good, if one has done something bad, and then later one recognizes that this was bad, one feels some remorse for it, and then one decides that I'm going to apologize to the person I hurt, or try to rectify the situation that I upset. In fact, in the suttas, it's mentioned that sometimes a monk who's done something wrong experiences kukucha, remorse, then he comes to the Buddha or goes to another monk and confesses. So I would consider that.
And it leads to trying not to do it.
Exactly, yeah. It can lead to the resolution not to repeat that bad action. Okay, Ajit?
Bhante, I see that 4 of the 5 hindrances are there in these unwholesome factors.
Yeah.
Where does the sensual desire...
Oh, sensual desire is a modality of greed. Yeah. In fact, I should have explained that greed, we use the word, or we translate lobha as greed, but the word actually has a very wide range from sensual craving to, desire to get more wealth, which is what we ordinarily mean by greed, to attachment to one's possessions, even enjoying certain sense objects, like somebody enjoys trying many different types of delicious food, and then he relishes the taste. Well, I don't want to eat Chinese food every day, so somebody invites me out to eat. I say, let's go to an Italian restaurant or a Mexican restaurant. Okay. Okay, so all of these, even just liking, even to be praised, is a kind of greed. Yeah, so lobha has quite a wide range. And so all of the 5 hindrances come within the 14 unwholesome cetasikas. Okay, then Neil.
Thank you, Bhante. It's just a clarification. Did I understand you to say that in the greed trio, wrong view and conceit, either one or the other always occurs with greed,
No.
but not both?
I didn't say that one or the other always occurs with greed, or if I did, I misspoke. What I said is that when greed or conceit occur, they always occur in the greed-rooted citta. But there can be greed-rooted cittas without wrong view, without conceit. There can be greed-rooted cittas that occur with view, but not conceit, and greed-rooted cittas that will occur with conceit, but not with wrong view simultaneously.
Did you also say there could be a greed-rooted Cheetah with neither?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let us move on now to, the next group is called, the next and the last group is called the beautiful factors. Again, they're called beautiful factors. You have to go back to the distinction I made yesterday between the three types of beautiful cittas, that is, karmically wholesome cittas, the resultant cittas, which have roots, the beautiful resultant cittas, and the functional cittas. Those will be the active cittas of the Arahat. So the beautiful mental factors can occur in those cittas. Then we have 19, which are called universal beautiful cittas, because they are said to occur in every beautiful citta, every wholesome, every beautiful resultant, every beautiful functional citta. Okay, faith, and faith, let's see how it's, I won't read them all through, but we'll go through one by one. Okay, so faith is said to have the characteristic of placing faith or trusting. So its function is to clarify, because when the mind doesn't have faith and it's in a state of indecision or doubt, but when it gets faith, then it becomes clear and settled. And its function is to set forth, in that, the idea here is that the person who has faith in the Dhamma is ready to set out in the practice. And I have to say a few words about the word faith, because especially those coming from a Christian background, it sometimes has certain connotations and resonances which aren't quite intended here. So faith here is not intended as, call it the blind belief in doctrines, but it's placing trust. And I have to say that the Buddhist formulators of the Abhidhamma are working a little bit with a narrow framework, I think, of faith within a Buddhist context. This is what my own Sri Lankan Buddhist teacher said, that when somebody has faith in the Buddha Dharma, that's saddha. But if they have faith in another religion, then that's either wrong view or it's adhimokkha decision. I think confidence, maybe, in my understanding, it's a bit weak. And also confidence, I use confidence to render another word which is close. Yeah, but it's a matter of choice of words. So he suggests confidence as a rendering for saddha. But also one could say the Christian has confidence in the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, the divine incarnation. Yeah, okay, but I'm just saying that if one renders saddha, whether one renders it faith or confidence, it seems other religions can claim it as well. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's the same.
Yeah.
It really, so it's the same root. Oh, I'm done.
But I would still make a distinction. I would take a somewhat ecumenical view and say when somebody has a trust in religious principles as a grounds for right practice and for wholesome conduct, then I'd call that saddha. But when somebody grasps upon articles of religious belief and says, you have to believe this, this is the only way to salvation, if you don't believe this, then you're going to be tormented, or you're a lost soul, then I'd say that's a wrong view, coupled with usually underlying it is hatred or aversion. And maybe also there's a conceit, like, I'm right, you're wrong. Yeah, I would say that. That's a good way to put it. So it's a confidence or trust excluding attachment to views. Okay, then the next is mindfulness, which is a very broad quality, and there's been a lot of discussion about how to understand it. So here, just looking at the note, it signifies, you see, originally the word sati in Indian, pre-Buddhist Indian literature, and even afterwards, has the meaning of memory. But the Buddha has given it a variety of meanings in agreement with his own teaching. So the most prominent meaning is what's explained here as presence of mind, attentiveness to the present, rather than the faculty of memory regarding the past. Then its characteristic is not wobbling, not floating away. Its function is absence of confusion or non-forgetfulness. It's manifested as guardianship, and that mindfulness guards one from going astray. Or it's manifested as facing the objective field. This would be especially mindfulness in the context of meditation. And so I think we have some experience of mindfulness when we're practicing meditation. Then we could see it most clearly when we could even explain mindfulness as keeping, at least one way to explain it, keeping the object in mind. Like when we are trying to be mindful of the breath, we are trying to keep the breath in mind. When we're being mindful of walking back and forth, we're trying to keep the process, the act of walking in mind. Somebody asked yesterday about how there can be mindfulness in cheetahs without knowledge. I have to say I find this a bit puzzling also, because in the suttas, when the Buddha is explaining the practice of mindfulness, of right mindfulness, he almost always speaks of two qualities which go together almost like twins. That is mindfulness and sampajanya, which I translate clear comprehension. And so the Buddha always says, be mindful and clearly comprehending. Be mindful and clearly comprehending. But apparently maybe the compilers of the Abhidhamma have here cases where somebody is doing some good in imitation, say a child imitating a parent who is doing a good deed, where the parent maybe tells the child, bow down to the Buddha, and then the child bows down to the Buddha, or make an offering to the monk, so the child makes the offering. So I have to say I don't see how in that situation, on my understanding, how the child is acting with mindfulness also. And so maybe we just have to say that this is the way the formulators of the Abhidhamma conceived of mindfulness. Okay, so then we have next shame and fear of wrongdoing, which I already explained, or maybe a better renderings, conscientiousness and moral dread. Then we have non-greed, which has a range of aspects in the Abhidhammic understanding, from simply in wholesome Cheetahs, the absence of greed, to more positive manifestations. Well, for example, if one is doing mindfulness of breathing, it's a wholesome Cheetah, but non-greed is there simply as the absence of greed in that Cheetah. But non-greed could also take more positive manifestations, for example, in generosity, in renunciation, in helpfulness to others when one is devoting one's effort to helping others. That would be considered a manifestation of non-greed. And yet this is where I would come in with a little criticism of the Abhidhamma, in that it seems to me that the act of generosity has such a distinct characteristic from that of simply absence of greed in say, the absence of greed when doing mindfulness of breathing. So the question would come up, why not make it a distinct mental factor? And so if I were drawing up my list of mental factors, calling up 2,200 years ago, we have now a time machine telephone, and now the elders are getting, they're in council making up the Abhidhamma list of Chaitasikas. Hey guys, I want to put in my argument, let's make giving generosity a separate mental factor. In fact, we have chaga as generosity mentioned very often in the suttas. Okay, so, but let's just pass up non-greed here, which has different gradations, different manifestations. Non-hatred, again, is said to have a range of manifestations from simply the absence of hatred to loving kindness. And again, I have to make that long distance, time distance telephone call and put in my 2 cents and say, hey guys, venerable ones, it seems to me that there's such a difference between the absence of hatred in, say, practicing mindfulness of breathing or mindfulness of walking and actively generating loving kindness. So let's make loving kindness a separate Chaitasika. Okay, next comes neutrality of mind. This is in Pali Tatramajjhatthata, and this is identical with upekkha equanimity, not as neutral feeling, but with, we call it balance of mind or steadiness of mind. The unwavering mind, the steady mind, the mind that can look at pleasant experiences, painful experiences without being shaken or disturbed by them. Or the mind that can look at helpful people and hostile people without having biases towards those who are friendly and biases against those who are hostile. So maybe we could say Tatramajjhatthata could be equanimity regarding objective conditions and impartiality regarding persons. Okay, we could say that Tatramajjhatthata might be explained as equanimity or balance of mind regarding objective conditions, that's agreeable or disagreeable conditions. For example, when one meets with pleasure and with pain, with gain and with loss, with praise or blame, and so on. So it's equanimity regarding external conditions and impartiality regarding persons, not having particular favorites, biases, prejudices towards some and against others, but regarding everyone as being essentially equal. Okay, then the next 7, 12 are actually 6 sets which are said, each one is said to apply to consciousness and then literally to body. But the way the Abhidhamma commentators interpret this, when it's said to apply to body, it means the body of the other mental factors, which seems a little artificial to me, but anyway, that's the way they distinguish them. And these seem to be, the way they draw out these qualities seems to be rooted especially in meditative experience, since when one goes into deep states of meditation, the mind becomes more tranquil, so we have tranquility. The mind becomes lighter, quicker, light and quick. The mind becomes more malleable, so we have malleability. The mind becomes more wieldy. This arises especially in the context of these supernormal powers, that one could wield the mind to develop these supernormal powers. So the wieldiness of the mind, proficiency, the mind can perform its tasks more effectively. And then the last pair, rectitude, seems to have, again, to go back to the moral quality of the wholesome or beautiful mind, that it's a mind which is honest, upright, a mind of integrity. And so each of these applies to, according to this understanding, to the Cheetah itself, taken in abstraction, and then to all of the other mental factors existing within that Cheetah. So they all have the qualities of tranquility, lightness, malleability, wieldiness, proficiency, and rectitude. Okay, at this point we're going to take a 15-minute break. Then I'm going to come back. So we've covered 9 of the beautiful qualities. There are 6 more to take. Yeah, so we'll come back at 10:35. I'll start to speak